Before FC25 released, there were articles with massive lists giving changes that were meant to be in career mode this year. These articles promised a bunch of changes. Players can grow and age now, there's a ton of new nations to scout, and hopefully the AI isn't quite as brain dead when it comes to building squads. Well, today I'm going to find out if any of this is true. And let's start by looking at player aging, because while it sounds like it could be a small change, I think it could actually be a big deal for career modes that go on past 5 or 6 seasons. So this is my youth player called John Nicholson, and I've heard that players can age and change in career mode this year, so let's see what happens. I'm going to simulate season by season into the future, and we'll have a look at any changes that happen between each year. I've turned off sackings, training and transfers, so we should be able to stay at Forest until the end of this career mode. So in season 1, he looks like this. He's a 5'7" central midfielder, 145 pounds, and has quite a young looking face. Let's have a look and see what he looks like as he gets older. So simulating seasons this year is actually quite slow, because games show their results after every single match. This could take quite a while, so let's skip back to when we're in July 2025. Okay, so about 15 minutes of simulating later, we've simulated one season. It's not gone well for our club, we got relegated, but how is Nicholson doing? Well, he's still the same 5'7", he's still 145 pounds, and he's still 61 rated. Fair enough with the overall, because he didn't actually play once in the Premier League, but I can't see any differences on his face or in his physique at all. Maybe when he hits 18, he'll have another growth spurt. Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's simulate for another season. Well, season 3, and he has the exact same face, the exact same height, and the exact same weight. So it looks like players only really grow up to the age of 16. It's a weird thing, but if we look at this player who's 14, when we signed him, he was 5'2", a few months later he was 5'3", and by the time that he did turn 16 and could be signed, he's 5'8". It's definitely more than I thought he would grow when it comes to height, but he also grew from 145 pounds to be 157. Okay, so we know that players can't actually grow once they turn 16, but what about their player faces? This was one of the big new features with Cranium, that players are not scanned, but they look a lot better. So let's have a look and see if there's any changes. Well, here's our player aged 18, here's what he looked like at 17, and here's when we signed him at 16. Here's the same guy when he's 22 years old. Can you see any differences between him being 16 and 22? Because I can't see a single one. I don't think anyone watching this video would look the same in 2024 as they will in 2030. I know that I definitely won't. So I can guess that some of the comments are saying people look the same at 16 and 22, so let's have a look at some different ages. Generic faces use the same Cranium technology as youth players, so let's see if it works on one of those. Let's find a player to compare, someone in their late 30s, and here's a good one. Omar Bogle was a pretty good player in the past, and he has a good Cranium face that's not been scanned. Here's what he looks like in 2030, and if we start a new save with Crew Alexandra, here's what he looked like back in 2024. So basically, was IGN lying when they said that this feature was in the game? I think that they just misunderstood the player aging feature for being something that only happens to players under 16 and stated that it would apply to every player. It's a shame too, because this would have been a really fun feature, but from what I can tell from 2 hours of simming seasons, it's not in the game at the moment. But what about the new scouting nations? Surely they are actually in the game. So yeah, FC25 has added a lot more places to scout. Here's a list of every nation that you can pick, and there's some cool choices, especially in Africa, Oceania, and even in Europe. But I want to pick 3 specific nations. We're going to look at Armenia, Georgia, and Sri Lanka, because they all have unique naming conventions, and I want to see how EA has actually managed the name pools for some of these new nations on FC25. So I've set up Youth Academy Scouts, I've simmed for 2 months, and let's have a look at some of the results. We'll start with Armenia, because I know from playing in the beta that the game struggled with this nation, and it's still exactly the same. If you scout Armenia, there's just a single last name. If you're called Sarkisian, you'll love Armenia, but I mean, Armenia isn't that important in the footballing world, we can probably ignore that. Let's have a look at these other 2 nations instead. So it looks like Sri Lanka only has 2 surnames itself, Silva and Diaz, which of course is great if you're playing as Man City, because these 2 names mean a big deal for the sky blue half of Manchester. Georgia is actually way better because there's at least 5 surnames here and probably a few more, but it's a shame that such a big feature has this flaw because it means about a quarter of the new scoutable nations can't really be used unless you want to have a squad that have every player with the same player names. Some of the other smaller nations like San Marino uses the Italian name pool and Andorra uses the Spanish one, so they're not such a big deal. It's just these unique nations, EA hasn't really put too much effort into them. So let's move on to the last thing that I mentioned at the start. Can AI squad build in FC25? Well, I'm in the year 2030 from the player aging sim, and here are the latest big money transfers. Gavi has just moved from Barcelona to Milan and now Bayern Munich, and each time he's moved for over £100 million. It's not the best transfers, but it is possible that this would happen if Barcelona had some serious money issues. Inter have just signed Martin Odegaard, who's now 30 years old, and when he gets to that kind of age, I can see that kind of move happening. Saka to Madrid is another transfer that might happen when he gets a bit older, especially if he's never won the Champions League with Arsenal or the World Cup with England, so far so good. There's also a lot of regens moving for big amounts too, so it seems like there's never going to be a lack of superstars inside career mode. Let's have a look at some of the squads instead of the biggest transfers. How about Manchester City? One of the richest teams in the game and probably one of the most important. Their attackers look good, there's about 2 for each position, but they're good quality. Their midfield is absolutely stacked. They've got Valverde, Camavinga and Echeverri, but oh dear, they only own 2 centre-backs, 1 left-back and 2 right-backs. That is absolutely awful. They also only have a single goalkeeper. Kobel is good, but what team only has a single goalkeeper? I actually scouted their defenders to see what their ratings were, and this is not a team that Manchester City should be using. They have what I think is the Marquinhos and Kyle Walker regens. Even though they might play Camavinga at left back, there's no depth and basically no quality in this squad. Maybe this is just EA simulating some kind of Manchester City embargo, so let's have a look at Manchester United instead. Well, it's slightly better, they have roughly 2 players for each position, but it's still so much worse than the squad they had in Season 1. Real Madrid are in a better position, but their squad is still worse with less depth, and they've got basically no central midfielders. It seems like each AI team is lacking in at least one area, and it's usually the areas that they were best in at the start of the save. Of course, Manchester City start off with a really good goalkeeper and lots of defensive depth, but could use some younger midfielders. It seems like EA has set it up so they focus on signing those, and then never adjust to what they need to sign next. The same could be said for United, Madrid and even Newcastle, who have gone from having a quite weak defence to going crazy and have a full list of defenders. They actually have more defenders than every other position in their squad combined. It's just a crazy lack of balance. I did think the squad building was going to be better on FC25, but it seems like the AI has the exact same problems building a squad that it had back on FIFA 16, where you'd see Manchester United signing 10 of the best strikers in the world just because they didn't have one on day 1 of the save. I hope this doesn't sound like I'm just complaining for the sake of complaining. I want this to be a really good game, and if a couple of these little things were changed, then I think it would be a good game. Player aging doesn't matter that much, I'll be totally honest. The youth scouting nations having Armenia with 1 name, again, isn't that big of a deal, but the fact that the players still don't join the right teams and the squads aren't balanced, it just sucks some of the fun out of playing quite a long save on FC25. I can see that the teams have pretty good starting 11s, but beyond that, there's basically nothing in any of these teams. Hopefully this can be fixed with a patch, and hopefully FC25 continues being as fun as it seems from the gameplay that I have actually played so far. It's just a shame that some of the off-the-field changes weren't actually as big as they seemed before we got the game. Hopefully you enjoy the game if you've already bought it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm trying to get to 100k, so subscribe if you want to see more FC25 content. Even though it's not perfect, of course, I'll still be making a lot more of that. But thank you, I'll see you soon. Cheers and goodbye.